The end of the broom handle connected with my shoulder with a dull wooden thwack. My daughter-in-law Miranda didn't flinch. My son Leo, who was watching from the doorway, let out a short hollow laugh and said I shouldn't call 911 because it might upset her. I stood there frozen by the sheer breathtaking casualness of it all. The bruise that bloomed on my skin faded in a few days, but something deep inside me, something I thought was foundational, cracked wide open. I had sold my bookstore, the sanctuary I had built over 40 years. I had given up everything to be with them, to be cared for after a minor health scare. But in that moment, with the scent of pine-scented floor cleaner in the air, I realized I had become invisible, an obstacle to be nudged aside. So I packed one small bag, and in the pre-dawn quiet, I started walking towards something I never thought I would find again. Happened next changed far more than just my life. Hemlock's Haven had been my life's work for 40 years. I sold my first rare edition there. I held Leo in one arm and shelved poetry with the other. That place, with its scent of aging paper and brewing tea, knew my laughter, my grief, my winters, and all my beginnings. But after the transient ischemic attack last October, the doctor's clinical term for what felt like a brief, terrifying flicker of my own lights, I knew something had to change. The doctor called it a warning. I called it a door creaking closed on a life I could no longer manage alone. Locked the shop for the last time on a rainy Thursday, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that used to bring customers in for hours. I didn't cry, but my hands lingered on the brass lock, my muscles aching for one more morning. Spent arranging paperbacks and brewing coffee that evening while sorting through the final boxes in the back room. I found an envelope. I didn't recognize it was tucked inside my unfinished manuscript. A story about a woman who loses her memory. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, but unmistakable. It was Walter's. My husband must have written it a few weeks after his own stroke. 7 years ago, and hidden it here between the lives we built and the ones we only dreamed of. His words were simple, a quiet echo of the man I loved. Cora, if anything ever happens to me, don't you dare keep living for someone else's comfort. You gave me a lifetime promise. You'll take what's left of your story and make it entirely your own. I sat on the cold floor for a long time, the letter a warm weight in my lap. The silence of the empty shop pressing in. I had told myself I was moving in with Leo and Miranda to recover, to simplify. But the truth was, I was terrified of what life looked like without the daily rhythm of being needed by my books and my customers. That letter became the final, most important thing. I packed Leo. Came the next day with Miranda and their daughter Sophie. I watched him carry my old Royal typewriter to the trunk of his SUV, chattering about a coworker's promotion. Miranda stood by the passenger door, arms crossed, already scrolling through her phone. Only Sophie, with her wide, serious eyes, looked up at me and asked, "Are you sad, Grandma?" I shook my head and forced a smile, but something in her gaze told me she knew better. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rain-streaked window at the bookstore's faded green sign. The paint was peeling. The life inside had already begun to fade. Still, I whispered to the glass, "Thank you." Sometimes a chapter doesn't end with a period. Sometimes it simply folds into another story altogether. And this one, starting to realize, was mine to write. The guest room was in the basement. It had no window, only a single dim lamp, and a framed stock photo of a pine forest that felt like a mockery of the sky. The mattress was stiff, the air thick with the faint, cloying scent of damp carpet and lavender scent detergent. "Thank you," I said, but the words felt like sandpaper in my throat. Miranda had left a note taped to the stainless steel refrigerator upstairs. House guidelines. It was printed, bullet-pointed, and color-coded. Quiet hours after 9. No television in shared living spaces. Please refrain from using scented products. Allergies. Limit reheating foods with strong odors. Guests should clean up immediately after using kitchen facilities. The list ended with a cheerful, soulless smiley face. I folded the paper and tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan. Later, I found Leo in the kitchen pouring cereal for Sophie. He shot me a sheepish glance. "Miranda just likes things to be clear," he explained. I nodded as if I understood, but my body hadn't even had a chance to settle into their life and I already felt like a tenant on probation. That afternoon I tried to unpack, but there was no dresser in the basement. Only 2 large plastic bins, labeled holiday decor, and a yoga mat rolled tightly against the wall. I kept most of my clothes in my suitcase. I arranged my favorite books in a neat row on the concrete ledge above the bed, their spines a small comforting skyline. I overheard Leo on the phone. That evening, his voice a low murmur in the hallway. He was talking about updating paperwork, about making sure everything was in place, just in case. Then I heard the word will. I didn't know who he was speaking to, but his voice had the strained, responsible tone he always used when he was nervous. Night at dinner. Miranda brought it up. She said it would be a huge help if I could clarify a few things. Legally. Nothing major, she assured me. Her smile bright and brittle, just a standard power of attorney. A medical directive. Things got so complicated when my aunt passed away, Leo added almost as an afterthought, that I should consider drafting a new will soon. Something clean, he said, something that won't leave room for confusion down the road. Then he passed me the salad bowl as if we were discussing the weather. I took the plate and nodded, but inside something heavy and cold settled in the center of my chest. I didn't sleep much that night. The basement was too quiet. The silence punctuated only by the heater clicking on and off above me. The house's pipes groaned like tired old bones in the dark. I reached for the small box I kept in my travel bag. Inside was Walter's letter. His words echoed in my head. Don't live for their comfort. Live for yours. And yet here I was in a windowless room, reading a note about refrigerator rules, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. It happened the following Tuesday. My teacup, a delicate porcelain one, Walter had given me, slipped from my grasp and shattered on the kitchen tile. It broke into 3 neat pieces. Before I could even crouch down to clean it up, I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder, not a hand. It was the end of a broomstick. Watch it, Miranda said, her voice light, almost playful. But the bristle end was turned away. What touched me was hard, cold wood. She stood over me, her expression the same one you'd use to shoo away a stray cat that had gotten too close to the food. I stayed on my knees for a beat longer than necessary, just long enough for the silence to stretch and curdle. When I looked up, Leo was leaning in the doorway, peeling a banana. He offered a little smirk, a flicker of amusement, then averted his eyes to the floor. He didn't say a word. He just finished peeling his banana and walked into the dining room. I swept the broken cup into a dustpan and kept wiping the floor, long after it was clean. Later that evening, I heard Sophie's soft footsteps on the stairs. I glanced up and saw her halfway down, frozen, her small hand clutching the railing. She had seen the whole thing. Our eyes met. She didn't speak, and neither did I from behind her. Miranda's cheerful voice called out, telling Sophie to come help fold laundry, then a smile that was a masterpiece of insincerity. She added, Grandma's just tired today. She tripped earlier, clumsy old feet. Sophie hesitated, her gaze still locked on mine, then turned and walked back upstairs, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than a tombstone. I didn't mention the broom, I did mention the smirk. I just wiped down the counters and pretended the cup was old. Anyway, the next day a neighbor came by. Miranda invited her in, made coffee, and they laughed in the living room, talking about yoga studios and middle school admissions. When the neighbor asked how long I was visiting, Miranda answered before I could. Oh, Cora's a huge help. She's helping out with the house while Leo works late. She keeps things running down there. Not his mother. Not a retired bookstore owner who knew more about literature than anyone in this town. Just a quiet helper tucked away in a basement. I smiled. It's a habit you learn after decades of holding back opinions for the sake of family peace. But that night in the damp silence of my room, I opened my old journal and wrote a single line. They are not being cruel, they are being efficient, and I am being forgotten efficiently. Envelope was tucked between a stack of junk mail and utility bills. It was small and cream-colored, addressed to me in the careful looping cursive of an 11-year-old. Inside, on a folded piece of cardstock, decorated with glittery sunflowers, Sophie had written in pencil, "Dear Grandma, thank you for always smelling like cinnamon, and for reading to me when nobody else has time. I wish I could sit next to you more." I read it 3 times, my fingers tracing the slightly smudged letters. I folded it gently and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan, where it rested over my heart. That simple note settled somewhere deep inside me, in a place I had kept locked since I left my bookshop. Later that day, Leo called me upstairs. Miranda was already seated at the dining table, a thick folder open in front of her, a pen lying neatly across the top page. The air felt staged, like I had just walked into a corp meeting. "I never agreed to attend, Mama." Leo began, his voice a little too casual. "Miranda and I were thinking that basement room really isn't good for you. No window, no natural light, and those stairs aren't safe for you long term." I remained silent, watching him. His tone was rehearsed. Miranda chimed in, her polished smile firmly in place. "If we move you into the upstairs guest room, you'll have a view of the garden. All that lovely morning light. It'll be so much easier for Sophie to visit you too." She paused, her eyes bright and expectant. "We were thinking if you would consider updating the house deed to include our names. It would make everything so much simpler. In the long run, that way, if anything ever happens, there won't be any messy probate or stress for Leo." She pushed the folder slightly toward me. I didn't touch it. My gaze drifted to the tulips blooming outside the window behind her head. They were starting to wilt. April was almost over. I remembered planting yellow tulips with Walter in the small patch of earth in front of the bookstore. He always picked the ones that bloomed early and faded fast. I nodded slowly, my expression carefully neutral. "That room upstairs does sound much nicer." Leo let out a breath, a wave of relief washing over his face. Miranda smiled, closing the folder. "Great, we'll keep the paperwork ready for whenever you feel comfortable signing. No pressure at all." That evening, as I folded laundry in the dim basement light, my hand brushed against the note in my cardigan pocket. Sophie's words felt like an anchor in a churning sea. "Thank you for always smelling like cinnamon." I sat down on an old storage trunk, a pile of warm towels untouched in my lap. I thought about what it meant to be given kindness without conditions. Sophie hadn't asked for anything. She had simply remembered me. I opened the trunk and pulled out a box of Walter's things. Tucked inside was a draft of his last will. My name was there, clear as day, beside the words "sole inheritor," and beneath that, stuck to the page, was a sticky note in his crooked, faded handwriting. "If anyone ever makes you feel small, Cora, get back up and write the story yourself." I folded his note and placed it next to Sophie's. The upstairs room might have sunlight, but the price was written in ink. I had spent enough of my life paying for space that should have been freely mine. The second time Miranda hit me, it was my hand. I was in the kitchen after dinner trying to sweep up the cracker crumbs Sophie had accidentally spilled. As I reached for the broom, the handle slipped when I went to adjust my grip. Miranda turned sharply, yanked it from my hand, and in one swift, economical motion, the wooden end of it smacked the back of my wrist. I didn't cry out. The sting spread up my arm, slow and quiet like a bruise, still thinking itself into being. Leo had already gone upstairs, claiming he had to catch up on emails. Miranda didn't apologize. She just said almost casually, "It's dangerous when you wave things around like that." "You're lucky Sophie wasn't standing nearby." Then she left the room. I sat at the breakfast nook staring at the cold gray tiles. A few minutes later, I heard a soft shuffle from the hallway. Sophie stepped out holding a small first aid box. Her eyes went straight to my wrist. She opened the box, took out a cold compress, and gently pressed it into my palm. Her hands were careful, too careful. For a child, she wrapped the cloth around my wrist with slow determination, biting her lower lip in concentration. "You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. "I know," I said, my voice barely breath. She stayed for a moment longer, then put the box away and disappeared upstairs. her bedroom door closing with a soft but certain click that night. I didn't sleep. The hand Miranda had once written bedtime stories, held Sophie close after fevers, and folded years of birthday cards, felt foreign. I went to a small chest in the corner of the basement and pulled out the manuscript. I had never finished the novel about a woman who starts over in her 70s. I hadn't looked at it in years. I added a new page to the end, writing in pencil she didn't break. I wrote, she bent quietly, then she gathered herself, stood straighter than before, and chose her own next chapter. My hands still throbbed, but my mind was clear, with a precision that comes not from anger but from absolute certainty. I folded Sophie's letter next to the new page, and placed it back in the chest. Then I turned off the light. This part ends here tomorrow. I would begin to make quiet preparations. No announcements, no drama, just decisions. Because the second time someone hits you, you stop asking why, you start answering for yourself. The attic had always been off limits. Miranda said it was too dusty for my fragile lungs, but that morning, with the house empty, I climbed the creaking stairs. It smelled of cardboard and time. Light filtered through a single round window, hazy with cobwebs. In the back, under a broken lamp, was a box marked in faded marker. Mom. Old papers inside. I found Walter's handwriting first, folder labeled Will 2011. Beneath it was his old pocket notebook. I opened it to a familiar message. If I go first, let her write. Let her live where she wants. Let her start again, if that's what she needs. My hands shook. Behind that I found my own lost manuscript. I flipped to the last page. Had written before his death. She waited, not because she had to, but because she hoped someone would see her again, not just walk past her. I sat on a dusty stool and pulled a blank page from the back of the folder. I am not writing fiction anymore. I wrote my handwriting tight, and certain I am right. What is real about women who are silenced, who are labeled burdens, who vanish inside their own homes. I placed the new page with the old draft, slid it into a padded envelope, and tucked it into my bag that night. When Miranda commented on the dust in my hair, I smiled faintly. Just going through some Walter's old things. Later in my room, I opened my laptop. The password was still the name of my old bookstore. I created a folder titled The Verity Project. I scanned the new pages along with the deed to the house. We had sold. No one would know what I was building yet, but something had shifted. I was no longer a woman waiting for kindness. I was a woman in motion, gathering the broken pieces of herself in the quietest room of the house. It was still dark when I zipped the suitcase shut. The house slept in the hallway. I paused by the mirror and recognized the woman looking back. I gently removed Miranda's schedule from the fridge and dropped it in the trash as I opened the back door. A soft sound made me turn. Sophie. She stood at the edge of the hall, her small frame wrapped in a fuzzy robe. She didn't ask where I was going. She stepped closer and held out a small handmade bookmark. On it, glitter glue, were the words, "I believe you." My voice caught. I just nodded. She wrapped her arms around my waist in a quick, fierce hug. Then she was gone. I stepped out into the crisp, cool air. The bus stop was 2 blocks down. My suitcase rolled softly behind me. I didn't feel nervous or guilty. Clear on the bus. I sat by the window and added Sophie's bookmark to the envelope with my manuscript and Walter's letter. They were my compass points. As the bus turned out of the neighborhood, I looked back once, not to mourn but to mark it done. I didn't belong in that house anymore, not in the basement, not in the attic, not in the margins of their story. I arrived at the old bookstore space just before sunrise. The key still turned inside. It smelled of time and paper. My name was still a faint ghost on the awning above the door. I stood in the center of the empty space, my suitcase beside me. It was beginning, not a return, not a retreat. It was the start of the Verity Project. Not in fiction but in life. The morning light crept through the dusty blinds. My suitcase stood by the door, but my hands were already busy. I wasn't sorting books. I was sorting purpose. I started by cleaning the windows, pane at a time, in the back office. Under a pile of yellowed receipts, I found the old business license. My name still printed clearly across the top. It felt like shaking hands with a version of myself I wasn't ready to let go of. After all, by the end of the week, the shelves were scrubbed. I put a small table near the entrance with a coffee pot and a sign, "Free Coffee, Free Ideas." A few older women from the neighborhood peeked in. I told them it wasn't reopening as a store, not exactly. Some stayed for coffee. The pace was slow and I let it be. That Sunday I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Anya Sharma. She was an attorney who had been a loyal customer. She was the one who, after Walter passed, advised me to take my time before selling the shop. She called back that evening, her voice warm and direct. The next day, over coffee at my folding table, I explained what I wanted to build: a charity, but a foundation. A space for women, especially older women who had been silenced or made to feel invisible. I wanted to offer them tools, legal guidance, estate planning workshops, support groups for emotional and financial abuse survivors, a place where their voice didn't have to be loud to be heard. Anya leaned back and smiled. She said she'd help, no fee. Just a promise that I wouldn't give up. That night I wrote in a fresh notebook, "The Verity Project." And underneath, "For every woman who thought her story ended with someone else's decision." The following week, a few women returned, bring friends. One asked to use the old poetry corner for a journaling workshop. I cleared the space. Another wanted to host a talk on setting boundaries with adult children. I nodded. It was beginning. I set up a small donation jar, not for money, but for stories. Scraps of paper began to appear. I haven't spoken to my daughter in 5 years. My son took control of my bank account. I miss being called by my first name. I read each one in silence, folded them gently and filed them under hope. By the end of the month, the sign on the window changed. No longer said, "Closed." It read, "The Verity Project." Quiet voice. Real power. Taped beside it was a hand-drawn bookmark. I knew that handwriting. The call came on a Tuesday. A producer from a regional public affairs program had heard about us. She wanted to feature our work, but only if I felt safe sharing my story. I agreed on one condition: my face would not be shown. My voice and the voices of the women who walked through my door were more than enough. The segment aired on a quiet Thursday. Within hours, my phone began to ring. Women from all over the state left messages. I didn't know I was allowed to say no. My daughter says, "I complain too much, but now I think she just doesn't want to hear the truth." I thought I was alone. By the weekend, we had over 60 names on a list. Some just came and stood at the door looking in with wet eyes before walking away. But they had found the address. That was enough. Word traveled. A local paper followed with a short piece. A national blog reposted the video. Our makeshift website crashed. I didn't know that. Back in the house I used to live in, Miranda was pacing the TV remote clutched in her hand. The screen showed a blurry shot of the foundation's front window. As my voice told a story not mine by name but familiar enough for her to recognize every word. "She's trying to make us look like monsters," she muttered to Leo. He didn't answer. "You're just going to let her drag our family through the mud," she said louder. But Leo was still staring at the screen. He didn't see the shame or the headlines. He saw the bookmark. The one that "I believe you." And for a moment he remembered his daughter Sophie slipping that very thing into my suitcase, thinking no one would notice. He rose quietly and left the room. Back at the shop, Anya walked in holding her phone. She showed me a screenshot from the broadcast. Me from the back speaking to a circle of women. "This is bigger than just a foundation now, don't you?" she said. I didn't reply. I just looked around the room at the worn carpet, the old shelves, and the faces I had come to know. This wasn't just a second chapter. It was a whole new book, and we were all still writing it. One afternoon, while I was reviewing intake forms, Anya walked over with a small envelope. No return address. Just my name in a child's handwriting. Inside was a thin booklet, stapled together. The cover read in uneven blue ink, "Chapter 1 and 2. By Sophie." It wasn't a story really, just short paragraphs with sketches. A sun through a window. A woman on a couch reading. A figure standing alone in a room. But the words held more weight than most books. She wrote about the night she watched me pack. How she wanted to say something but didn't know if she was allowed. She wrote about how the house felt cold after I left, how her mom said I was just being dramatic, and how that didn't feel true. At the bottom of the last page was a single drawing of a bookmark, and next to it, written carefully, "I still believe you." I sat there for a long time holding that booklet in both hands. It was a thread of hope, proof that what I did mattered, that silence wasn't empty. Later that week I mailed a small package back to her. Inside, I tucked a fresh blank notebook and a short letter. I told her I had read every word, that I was proud of her voice, and that she should keep writing not for anyone's approval but because her voice mattered. When I returned to my desk, I looked at the framed mission statement hanging on the wall. Below the title in small print were the words written by those who were told to be quiet. It reminded me why I started all this. Not to be heard louder, but to remind women and girls like Sophie, their truth doesn't have to wait for permission. The bell above the shop door chimed gently. One late afternoon, as the sunlight spilled through the windows in long, quiet lines, I was organizing a box of donated paperbacks. "Hi, Grandma." I turned there. She was Sophie, taller now, her hair in the same mess braid. I used to help her with. Her eyes were a little unsure, but her feet were planted firmly on the worn floorboards. She walked up to me and opened her palm. Inside was the bookmark. "I kept it with me," she said, her voice soft. "I thought maybe one day I'd give it back." I knelt down and opened my arms, stepped into them, and I held her tight, feeling her shoulders relax against my chest. It wasn't a reunion from a movie. There were no big speeches, no dramatic music. It was quiet and real. When we pulled apart, I told her she could stay for a while, that I had tea brewing, and a whole stack of books needed sorting. She nodded, and we walked toward the back room together. As we passed the bookshelf near the window, she glanced at the Foundation's plaque on the wall. Her fingers brushed the edge of it before she turned and smiled at me. That smile felt like the first line of something new, and as settled into the afternoon, I realized this chapter wasn't ending at all. It was simply turning a page. If you've ever felt like your voice was dismissed, like you had to stay quiet to keep the peace, perhaps you understand what Cora carried. Her journey is one of many, but maybe it echoes something. You too. What does your second chapter look like? When was the last time you felt truly heard? If this story stayed with you, I'd love for you to share it, because someone somewhere might be waiting to find their own voice through yours. Thank you for listening.